Hello, my name's Martin Kelly. I'm senior editor here at Friends Journal, and with me today, joining me from Del Mar, New York, is Joseph Olejak. And Joseph is an article here in the current March issue of Friends Journal, 26 weekends at Columbia County Jail. So thanks for joining us,
You're welcome.
Joseph. And why were you spending your weekends in jail?
Well, in 2013, I was prosecuted for willful failure to file income tax forms, and that was my penalty. The penalty probably was going to be 3 years, but when the probation people did my interview for, the judge's sentencing, I mentioned to them that I was a Quaker, and well, I should correct that. I'm not an actual Quaker yet. I haven't been admitted as a member into the Quaker meeting. I'm an attender, and I'm still
At Old Chatham, you said?
in Old Chatham, yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm still going through the clearness process to become a member. But he understood that it was my Quaker beliefs that led me to not file income tax forms. And one of the things that I shared with them was when Madeleine Albright was interviewed on 60 Minutes by Leslie Stahl and was asked when the Clinton administration withdrew food and medicine from Iraq, was it worth it that 500,000 children died? And without skipping a beat, she said yes.
Yeah.
And it was at that moment that I knew that there was something seriously wrong and I couldn't do it anymore.
Sure. Well, war tax resistance is, a lot of friends over the, past, especially 20, 30 years, it's been common. Not as much now, sort of goes in cycles, it seems. We should sort of tell anyone who might be contemplating it or thinking about it, most of the time, people do not go to jail. So you were an exception there, but
Yeah,
you had a much more lenient sentencing than that 3 years.
I did. Most people get, 3 years in a federal prison. I was given weekends in the county jail, and I think the leniency partly had to do with me having children that I needed to support, but also partly to do with my beliefs,
Yeah.
my deeply held beliefs. I should also mention to the people listening that, I started my war tax resistance in 1994, and it went on for, 16 years before they decided to prosecute me. And the prosecution largely occurs based on the amount of money that you owe the federal government. I mean, there's like a trigger, like when it gets to a certain amount, then they decide, okay, this is prosecutable. I mean, if you're withholding small sums of money, there's a very minor likelihood that they're going to go after you.
Hmm.
But because I was a doctor of chiropractic, and I had a fairly high profile in the community, I was the perfect target.
Sure. Sure. Well, that doesn't always happen. We mentioned a little bit before. I resisted war taxes for many years, and they never bothered me. And when I finally came clean, they actually apologized. I had an IRS agent apologize to me for not collecting my taxes all that time. Um, Very bizarre. Um,
Yeah.
but you used, our article doesn't actually talk much about the war tax resistance part. You used this as an opportunity to do some sort of classic Quaker journaling. So tell us about how that started and what you started finding and writing about there.
Yeah, well, I have a very close friend in the Old Chatham Quaker meeting, Jens Brown, and he gave me the Quaker journals that were written by Quakers a long time ago, in England when people were going to jail. And I read that on my first, weekend, and I was so moved by it that I decided to start keeping a journal. And being in jail is a unique opportunity because it presents opportunities to share, who you are with other people. I mean, there's lots of ways of going through jail. You can keep to yourself, or you can do what I did, which is just share with everybody.
Right.
And that's just who I am. I mean, I'm a chiropractor and I'm a healer, and I consider myself a Quaker, even though I'm not a member yet.
Mhm.
Um, and I saw opportunities to be with people and to share what was going on with me, and I just shared freely, and I made wonderful contacts with people there who told me their stories, and you really get to see, a different slice of humanity and be able to share what you have to share with those people.
Sure. And why don't you share a few of the stories? And that's what makes up the bulk of your article here is some of the stories. What are some of the common themes that you found among your fellow prisoners there?
Well, drug abuse was a big one. I'll tell you a story about a guy who I met there who it was his second time in jail, and he got addicted to medication when he was on a naval ship. And he said part of the hazing process of going through the military was alcohol and marijuana. And whenever they would go to ports of call, they would go on these binges. And that's when he started using drugs. And one of the things that happened to him on this Navy ship was he was responsible for a particular area of the ship that was under construction. And they didn't put, proper, like protections out to make sure that people wouldn't fall in this hole that they had cut out of a floor. And it was on his watch that someone fell through this hole in the floor and basically ripped their leg open.
Oh.
And he had like a post-traumatic incident as a result of that because he felt responsible for it. And, he used alcohol and drugs, to deal with that stress and anxiety. And then it eventually turned into heroin abuse. And when he started using heroin, he got into trouble and got in jail. And when we were in jail, he was telling me this whole story about what had happened to him. And what we actually got to was, like a really kind of deep listening of another human being's experience. And I said, one of the things that Quakers do is that, we listen for the word of God, like what is there, to listen for. And so we actually got into this practice in the jail of doing yoga and reading the Bible and listening for the word. And it was great. We would do these yoga sessions and it would, usually about an hour or so. And it was quite funny because, it actually attracted the corrections officers and the other prisoners. And they first looked at it like, with the jaded eye, like, what are you guys doing on the floor over there? That's kind of weird. And then people joined in and we actually created a situation where people started listening.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of early Quaker organizing was in the jails, so it's not, our type of worship is conducive to jails, even if prison ministries there are some, but they're somewhat rare, and most of our members are not spending weekends in jail.
Yeah.
One thing that kind of I found fascinating was, we have this idea that we, oppose war and we're not going to pay the taxes, and then you have your own career here as in chiropractic. How much it all sort of came around. So you have, people in jail who, got hurt maybe while serving in the military, and then they get addicted to drugs, and sometimes the drugs are in response to pain.
Yeah.
And you talked about actually doing some work, body work, with
Yeah.
them.
Well, as a healer, I'm not just a healer in my office. It's like it's a way of being. It's not a profession. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of ways to heal. Listening is healing. Counseling people is healing. Speaking the word is healing. And then, I've got my two hands, and these are the only tools that I need to do my profession. So, when there were people there who were suffering in pain because they were sleeping on these ridiculous cots that were basically steel boards, I saw an opportunity to help people, and I took it. Yeah, and I felt like that was an act of service.
Sure, it certainly comes across as such, reading it. But it just seemed so many of the stories had these sort of different mixes of these components, though.
Yeah.
I mean, what would, mass incarceration look like if we started dealing with, the medical issues and started helping people with post-traumatic stress, either from the military or from just living?
Yeah, I think post-traumatic stress has made some progress, but what happens in a lot of situations is that if military personnel are using illegal drugs to deal with their stress on a ship, mm-hmm. and then or in any situation, whether they're in the Marines or the Army, they just get kicked out. There's not a lot of questioning about like, hey, why are you using this stuff? It's more like an authority thing. Like you're supposed to not use drugs. We've caught you using drugs. You're done. You're out. We're giving you a dishonorable discharge. And then the people are left with, either addiction or, whatever stress they experienced in the military, and now they're out in civilian society and they're trying to deal with it, and they don't have the benefit of the Veterans Administration.
Yeah.
Not that the Veterans Administration provides great, services. They're kind of overwhelmed, and medication is used a lot to treat addiction issues, which in my mind is just substituting one drug for another. It doesn't really get underneath what I would call what's missing spiritually. There. It's a covering up of something that hasn't been dealt with.
Right. If you were sort of put in charge, what would you have differently? If, say, you could take all the money the Quakers or peace groups are spending on military and redirect it to sort of helping people in prison, what kind of programs?
Well, since most of the people in prison are either mentally ill or they're addicted, a vast majority of crimes are due to mental illness as well as addiction issues. Let's deal with the medical problems as medical problems instead of punishing people. We should set it up like the Dutch do, which is legalize the medications or the drugs and then manage it like a medical problem. I mean, they don't have rampant drug use in Holland. About 10 to 12% of the population use drugs, which is probably similar to what it is here. And the difference is that we criminalize it and they don't.
Right. Well,
so let's stop doing that.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, let's decriminalize a lot of things here and get people back into society.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks. I sort of wish we had more time and maybe we could do more of these. Again, Joseph's article is in this part one of the article. There'll be a part two later on this fall. And there's also a Quaker Speak video interview with you. So we'll put a link to that. And anyone who wants to know more about the war tax resistance, you were profiled in the war tax resistance newsletter. So we'll add a link to that. And if you have any other ones you want to share, we'll put them in the show notes on YouTube.
Yeah, I just want to say that the Old Chatham Quaker meeting is focused now on a letter writing campaign to support the Peace Tax Fund.
Okay.
And if anybody wants to get in touch with me on how they can do a letter writing campaign in their community, I'd be happy to support them.
Oh, great. Well, we'll have all those links there on YouTube for anyone. Just click through to the YouTube and we'll include lots of links. Well, thank you for joining us today from New York,
thanks.
Joseph.
Thanks, Martin.
Everyone can read the article and look forward to part two come this fall. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.